it's good to be back. I missed you guys while I was gone. It's been absolutely a wild few weeks. I know most of you probably get the note from Greg, my weekly email. If you don't, you can sign up for it in the app. But hopefully you saw the baptism that I got to witness last Sunday at our new church in Hamburg, Germany. It was one of multiple stories like that. And it's just a picture of the transformation that's happening through all of our new churches. I know over the last 2 weeks, you got to have Dexter here, you got to have Aaron here. And I can tell you from talking to them, they loved you. They absolutely loved you. I'm like, why did they love you? And the answer is not complicated. It's because they felt the love from you. And I really appreciate you encouraging those who are starting new churches, accomplishing this vision for us. I actually just got an email today from Lou Pizzacillo. Lou spoke here last summer as one of our new church guys who started a new church. He's on Long Island, New York. And last weekend, they baptized 48 people at their church on Long Island. They went to the coast, did it in the ocean. It was beautiful. I'll share some pictures sometime, but it's just awesome. But, while I was gone, I was catching up this week coming back. I ran into Noah, our high school pastor, and he was telling me about the trip all the high school students took for a week while I was gone. And there was just a ton of high schools who went to this conference, and it's amazing. And then he told me that at that conference, 6 of our high school students kind of raised their hands, stepped forward, and said, "Hey, I'm open to the idea that maybe ministry is my future. Potentially being a pastor, being a missionary, being someone who will serve God with their whole life." And you can probably imagine for me, that just puts chills in me because I was 16 or 17 years old when at a similar place, I made a similar decision. And I'm so grateful that I did and had the support that I did. But when I heard him tell me that story, I went immediately back to a prayer that many of you prayed with me 3 weeks ago when we kicked off this series called Dear Church. Do you remember this prayer? It was, "God, I will embrace what you have for me. God, we will embrace what you have for us." And the word embrace is everything. Because remember, I described this like the opposite of embrace, of course, is reject. I don't think there's many people in the room here that are rejecting what God has for them, but maybe. But in the middle of that, there's definitely a thing that's called hesitation. I'm not rejecting it, but I'm also not embracing it. I'm hesitating. I'm not sure if I'm going to step in and entrust my life to God. But if we would say, "God, I'll embrace what you have for me." And when I think about those 6 students and lots of other transformational decisions that took place that week with the high schoolers, I'm like, oh my goodness, here's what's happening. They're embracing it. And again, because I was there, I know the hesitations that has to come with raising your hand or stepping forward and saying, "Yeah, I'm open to this." Because I remember thinking when I was in a similar setting in the church I grew up in and did that, I remember thinking, what will my friends think? There's a lot of hesitation there. I remember thinking, man, I think this is what God's calling me to, but I could sure make a lot more money somewhere else, including in a family business that I had a straight shot into if I wanted. There's reasons to hesitate for that. There's reasons to hesitate because I thought, I don't know how my parents are going to respond to this, if they'll be proud of me or not. There's all kinds of reasons to hesitate. But when you in your life embrace what God has for you, it's a game changer. And I was thinking about this. I thought, do you think it's easier for a 16-year-old to embrace what God has for them? Or a 60-year-old to embrace what God has for them? What do you think? I mean, when you're 16, you're young, maybe you feel like you could recover from your mistakes if it goes that route, but also you don't have any track record really in your life of placing your whole life in God's hands, trusting him, and then seeing him come through for you. Where when you're 60, hopefully, when you're 60, you've had experiences in life and you've trusted God before and you've seen him come through. I think surely it would be easier when you're 60, right? But I'm not sure it always works that way. Sometimes the young minds are more pliable, and when we get older, we just batten down the hatches and do what we've always done and stop trusting God. And I think, it's so beautiful to see someone who would embrace those kind of things. So you probably noticed up here, we had a lot of students up here and a lot of representatives of our student ministry. Didn't they do an amazing job leading us in worship? And I absolutely want to give a shout out and celebrate how fortunate we are to have a high school pastor like Noah and a middle school pastor like Zach who are leading the students in that way. And that's the next generation for us. And of course, it's not just students, Suncrest kids. Oh my goodness, hundreds and hundreds of kids each week. Jen Ward not only leads her kids team with Jody and Adrian on it, but she actually oversees all of our next generation stuff, giving guidance from birth all the way through 12th grade. And those areas of ministry for us right now are thriving like crazy. And I get the sense that our church loves it. So I'm very, very grateful for that. You can imagine there's some intentionality to this. And the whole idea actually is that this weekend, as we're making our way through things that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in the New Testament, that he asked us to embrace certain things. And he talked about embracing generosity a couple of weeks ago and embracing hope last week. Well, one of his themes that he comes back to again and again is to call on the church, dear church, would you embrace the next generation? And so I'm going to read some scriptures to you today that come from, I think, a fascinating section of his writings. But before I read you the actual scriptures and the words that he says, can I give you just kind of a summary? This is Greg's version summarizing what Paul would write if he was writing to the church, maybe even to our church. I think he would say, dear church, I am aware of generational tendencies. Now, what are generational tendencies? Well, you can look at this a lot of ways. Of course, we know there's different generations in our world today, and in this church today. I mean, you could be Gen Z, you could be a millennial, you could be Gen Z, Gen X, you could be a boomer, any of those. And of course, it's true that each one of those generations has their own tendencies. There are plenty of memes out there that you can explore where we poke fun at ourselves and the generations that we're a part of. But he's not really, of course, describing the individual generations that exist in a church. He's wanting us to appreciate that over all of time, there are tendencies in the way that generations interact, certain things that you do at different stages of life. And I mean, just as kind of a simple example, I think he would say, hey, when you're young, I mean, maybe when you're a teenager or you're in your 20s, like you kind of have a choice of a road to take. Everyone, and for all of time has had this, where you either kind of feel entitled and you complain about the people who are older than you and you wish it were a different way, or you just humble yourself and you get hungry and you take off in life. That forever and ever, people who are about 20 have had to make that decision. And in the middle age of life, as I am right now, one of the big choices of life, well, what are you going to chase? What are you going to chase? And a lot of people choose to chase money or to chase fashion or to chase popularity or to chase power or to chase whatever. And some people choose to chase other things, significance, purpose, serving others, altruism. And I think that's such a significant choice for everyone at that middle stage of life to say, hey, what am I going to set my aim at and go? Especially after kind of just getting out of the gates. And anyone who's older, I mean, you know this, and we all know older people. When you're older, people either become gracious or they become grumpy. I mean, you choose, right? You choose. And Paul's aware that there are generational tendencies in this, but even more than like the specific things at different stages of life that you engage, one of the things he notes that comes out of the scriptures is to say, hey, actually things get passed down from generation to generation unless they don't. And it's one of his most fascinating observations, I think, to say, hey, we all probably could look at the generation who came before us and how we either embraced what they taught us and then we just embodied what they already did, or we were rebellious against or thought, oh, those old people, they don't know what they're talking about, and I'm going a different direction than them. You know, we all have to make our choices, and it's a very significant thing because one of the things we see right now is a sense of rebellion among younger adults. This is not uncommon. It happened when you were a younger adult against some of the things their parents taught them. And it was interesting, even at our elder retreat last month, we were having a conversation around the notion that it is true that there are plenty of people in their 20s these days who grew up in church. And at this stage, there's actually a term for it, are potentially deconstructing their faith. They're looking at it and saying, does this hold up? Does it hold up to my experience? Does it hold up to the truth? Does it hold up to history? Does it hold up? And some are deconstructing that. But one of the things I reminded the elders of, and this is what we see, I think, happen in our churches, there's lots of people who grew up without any church at all. And many of those people who are in their 20s now are actually deconstructing not having faith. They grew up without anything, and they looked at their parents and they're like, this isn't working. And now they're walking through our doors saying, there's got to be something else, something different. It's just the nature of things that you do in that generation. But one of the most powerful things I see people do as generations go from generation, as Paul describes this, is that there are unhealthy cycles. I mean, many people who were abused become abusers. And many people who hated that their dad drank himself to sleep each night now drink themselves to sleep each night. And one of the most powerful things a person can do is to watch the negative habits from a previous generation and say, I will interrupt that habit. It stops with me. I will not pass this on to my children. And there's a power in thinking about generations. It goes a little more than that. It says, dear church, I'm asking you to honor and serve the other generations. I mean, is there anything we're worse at today in our world than young people honoring older people and older people honoring younger people? A little bit ago, I said, we all know the memes from these different generations where we poke fun at ourselves. But you know this, we don't poke fun at ourselves. We poke fun at the other generations. Old people complain about young people. They don't want to work these days. Young people say, okay, boomer. And I just want you to say, I just want you to hear, while that may go on in the world out there, I pray it doesn't happen here. And I don't just mean when we're in the building. I mean from you in every setting that you're in. The most hideous thing on earth is that you and I group up with people who are like us. My race, my age, my gender, my thing, and then we complain about the other. Oh my goodness, is there anything more unchristian than putting myself and my group in the seat of superiority and just looking down and grumbling and complaining about the others? Oh my goodness, for it to be true that in our church, young people honor and celebrate and respect those who are older than us. And old people honor and celebrate and respect those who are younger than us. And then we are for each other, not against each other. Oh my goodness. How transformational could that be? Probably everyone in this room will be in a conversation with people from your generation sometime in the next 30 days. And you will hear people from your generation complain about another generation. It's probably going to happen. And I'm calling on you today in the spirit of Paul in the scriptures that when you're in that environment and you hear someone from your generation complaining about another generation, that you speak up and defend them. That you speak up and celebrate someone who's of a different generation than you. Because collectively, it is all of us that are the church, and we are encouraged to honor and celebrate. Paul is going to speak very specifically to different generations and how we would engage our faith. And it's not the same for everybody, but we are to cheer on one another from other generations. And then I think he would say, and make sure you invest yourself in the next generation. That while it's so healthy for all of us to celebrate all generations, up the age scale and down the age scale, there is something very particular in the calling of being a follower of Jesus that says, and make sure you're always providing for the kids. And make sure you're always providing for the teenagers. Make sure you're always providing for the next generation. A number of years ago, I was visiting a church that I just had the highest respect for. It'd been an influential church, and I was listening to their pastor cast vision to their church one service. And he stood up in front of their church. It's a very large church. And he said, hey, I just want to tell you some stats about our church. 10 years ago, our church had an average age of 38. And today, our church has an average age of 48. And then he said, straightforward to his church, He said, that is what we call a death spiral. To just age out as a church, to just create programs for the people who are already here and do what we like to do. And I was sitting there watching it all unfold. And that there was something that Spirit provoked in me that day to say, hey, let's make sure we're very intentional at our church, as the scriptures lead us to be very focused on getting younger and staying younger. Listen, the church is designed to be multi-generational. I know that at times I've said this so strongly that some of the older people in our church have felt like, do you really love me, Greg? I do love you, and I'm very grateful that you're here. Actually, one of the things that I found has happened after I cast the vision for us to be focused on the next generation and keep getting younger is that some older people left and some stayed. This is just my observation. The ones who wanted us to plan bus trips to Shipshawana left. And the ones who wanted to say, I'll invest in the next generation. I'll serve in Suncrest Kids. I'll give so we can hire the staff we need in those generations. I'm interested in building a legacy here for a long time. They stayed. And can I just applaud all of you who would say, man, as a church is intentionally trying to get younger, just not to drift older. We remain multi-generational. We actually just did a survey back in May. A lot of you were here on the weekend. We did it. And it's just like a number of questions, but one of them is demographics. So we find out, is our church getting older or is our church getting younger? We're just staying the same. And Suncrest this is so wild to me. We've grown so fast that in every age category, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, below, every age category we've grown. The numbers have gone up in every age category. But the pace at which they're going up is extraordinarily strong in the younger category. I wrote down these stats because I just want to share this and celebrate you and thank you for this. Among regular attenders at Suncrest, 25% of the attendance in this room, this isn't counting Suncrest Kids, 25% of the attendance in this room is under 30 years old. And let me tell you them all, then you can cheer at the end, okay? 25% is under 30, 45% is under 40. Churches would kill for those numbers. All my friends are jealous of our church. Then we said, hey, not just the regular attenders, what about the newcomers? People who have been here 5 times or less, the people who are coming through our doors. Hey, let's get the stats on that. It's even more wild. 39% of newcomers are under 30. 49% of newcomers are under 40. And I think, guess what? The majority is still over 40. But this is a healthy, multi-generational church because you have embraced investing yourself in the next generation. And I won't hesitate as I get older to keep calling our church to do exactly that. You know, when Paul was writing these letters to the churches, he is, of course, hyper aware of how these generations work and that, as I said, some things get passed down and sometimes things don't get passed down. Paul was actually a Jewish scholar. He knew the Old Testament very well. And I have to think that one of the verses that was echoing for him as he encouraged churches to embrace the next generation was this verse from the book of Judges in the Old Covenant. It says, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, meaning they had died and moved on, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done. One of the most tragic verses in all the scriptures right there in front of us. That there was a generation that knew and they passed on in terms of passing on from this life, but they had not passed on the faith to the next generation. And I just think I hear echoes of that passage all over Paul's writings. Now, I'm going to share with you some writings that Paul wrote to a guy named Timothy, and actually one passage that he wrote to a guy named Titus. I told you that when I was 16 or 17 years old, I had the sense that God was calling me to ministry, and I raised my hand and said, yep, I'm going to pursue that. I just want you to know, I grew up in a very small church. It wasn't 1/10 the size of Suncrest. But all the time at that church, when I was in those youth ministry years, they were sending me and guys and ladies like me to school to prepare for ministry all the time. It was just part of the culture of the church. And that church that I grew up in would call us their Timothys. They're Timothys. Because the idea is Timothy in the New Testament is a young person who's being raised up and called and then sent out into ministry. Let me tell you a little bit, because I'm going to share the passages from when Paul wrote a letter to Timothy. But here's the background. In Acts chapter 14, which is kind of the history of how the church began, and Paul comes onto the scene. Paul is this great apostle who does these missionary journeys all over the known world. On his first missionary journey in Acts 14, it says he goes to a city called Lystra. It's in modern-day Turkey. And when he's in Lystra, he shares the gospel, and many people become followers of Jesus, including many people who had been Jewish previously. And the sense is that in Acts 14, on Paul's first visit to Lystra, there was a young guy who was in a family named Timothy, and he became a follower of Jesus. Fast forward to Paul's next missionary journey. Acts chapter 16, Paul comes through Lystra again. He's just going around starting new churches everywhere that he can. And when he revisits Lystra this time, there's a few things that happen. First of all, Timothy's name surfaces for the first time. Timothy has devoted himself to the faith since Paul came through the first time. He's grown up. He's gained the respect, even though he's a young man, of people in his church. And Paul taps him on the shoulder and says, hey, how about you join me on the rest of this journey? And Timothy says yes to that on the spot. It's interesting. Paul in Lystra, in that second visit, heals someone. And then all the mob who did not want the church to thrive come against him. And they literally stone Paul. And they left him thinking he was dead. His friends pulled him outside of the city and he survived. But that's what Timothy witnessed when he was saying, like, am I going to embrace this for myself? Also, Timothy had not been circumcised. You're like, are you really going to talk about this, Greg? I really am going to talk about this. Timothy had not been circumcised. His dad was a Greek, so he had never followed through. But Timothy was going to be part of Paul's team to go and share the message of Christ, including with Jewish people. And Timothy didn't need to be circumcised to become a Christian. That's not in the mix. But Timothy's sense was, I ought to be circumcised so that I am not a barrier to people I'm trying to reach with this message. And I mean, isn't this wild? Timothy takes the step of being circumcised as an adult in order to embrace what God has for him. And then Paul writes these things to Timothy. Let me go through some of these passages pretty quickly. He says, Timothy, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. You see what he's saying? This is passed down generation to generation to generation. Thank God for a grandmother who had passed down the faith. Thank God for a mother who had passed down the faith. That we always have to be focused on the next generation and passing down the faith. It's interesting. I tell a lot of stories, of course, about my family. And as most of you know, if you've been around, I grew up in a great family. A family that was faithful to Christ, a family that supported me. And every now and then I'll talk to people, and they have come from different circumstances. And even once or twice I've had someone say to me, like, well, Greg, you're lucky. You had a great family growing up. Well, Greg, you're lucky. You had a great church growing up. And let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, yes. 100% right. I absolutely understand. I was born on third base. It's true. And I thank God for it. Not as often as I should, as often as I recall. Also, when you hear of someone growing up in a household of faith and it's shaping them and giving them opportunities and providing so much for them, you might tend to think of yourself as the one who didn't get that. But the calling here is to think of yourself as Lois, to think of yourself as Eunice, to say, I'll be the one to interrupt the cycle and my kids will have it better than I had. I will be Lois. I will be Eunice. I will be part of a church that provides so that the next generation will have something I did not receive. And that is the calling on everyone in this room. Paul also says to him, but as for you, continue in what you've learned and become convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it, and how from infancy you've known the Holy Scriptures. You grew up in a Jewish household. You know the Old Covenant almost as well as I do, he said. And whenever I read this, I just thought, like, as awesome as it is what happens in this room week in and week out, it's not as awesome as what happens in that preschool wing. How from infancy, children are learning the scriptures. You want to get our kids director riled up? You should try this on her, just for fun. Call what we're doing down there child care. It's not child care. It's an investment. It is teaching. It's helping kids to know who God is. From their infancy, to know the scriptures and the promises that are there for them, to know something about their identity and their trust in Christ, to make certain decisions, to learn how to pray, to potentially become baptized, to do all those things. It's amazing. And, I call our church planters heroes. I'm like, the people who serve in those classrooms, heroes. And those classrooms, and on Sundays, and on Mondays with our students. Because this is what happens. From infancy, we embed in the next generation that which will serve them well for their whole life. There's more passages. He says, Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in speech and in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And I just want to say, anyone who's 20 or under in here, or we could probably just say 30 or under in here, this is a good passage for you. Don't let anybody look down on you because you're young. You might think, well, I'm new to this. I'm not as strong. I haven't seen as much of God's work, but don't let people look down on you. Don't take that mindset. You set the example for the believers in your speech. Oh, that's huge. The way you speak in your teens and in your 20s, people are watching. In your conduct, in your love, in your faith, and in your purity. Paul is speaking to a generation of young people here who says, hey, you don't have to wait to lead until you're old. You lead by setting the example. You set the pace. People are watching. Paul also says this to Timothy. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. By this stage, Timothy is the pastor at the church in Ephesus, where the letter of Ephesians was written. And Paul's guiding him on how to lead the church. And he says, hey, you're a young leader, Timothy. When you talk to people who are older than you, don't exhort them harshly. Don't dishonor the person who's older than you. Treat them like they're your father. And he says, treat younger men as if they're your brothers, older women as if they're your mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. And this is a good generational message for all of us. What's Paul doing? He's saying, don't think categories. Don't think boomers and Xers and millennials. Personalize it. Like that's your dad. That's your sister. It's not some nameless, faceless generation. Treat them like somebody that you care about when they are a different generation than you are. Be the person who advocates for them. If you were in a circle and they were talking about your dad like that, you would speak up and defend your dad. So when you're in a circle and they're talking about a group like that, you speak up like they're talking about your dad. When Paul writes to another young leader named Titus, he expands on this a little bit. And he has 4 categories. So I'll let you decide which category you fit in, okay? Older men, older women, younger women. The older men. Let's say, what's older? You tell me so I don't get in trouble. 60? Let's go 45. Okay. Teach the older men to be temperate. Older men? This is really important. What does temperate mean? Steady. Not given to excesses. Temperate. Worthy of respect. Not demanding respect. Not saying, you got to listen to me, I'm older than you. You've shown yourself to be worthy of receiving respect. That's the focus that you've had. Self-controlled. Sound in faith, in love, and endurance. Next category. Likewise, teach the older women. No, I'm not doing that. 40? Did you say 40? 20? Let's just read the Bible, okay? Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine. Slanderers, gossipers, talking about other people. I'm going to talk about a strong meme world. Wine and women, it's strong. And I'd say, be careful. But to teach what is good. All right, here's another. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children. Listen, every young mom that I talk to, she feels conflicted. Like there's expectations on her, different places, career-wise, and this is clarifying something. It's good to honor God, to prioritize first, not the only thing, but first. Love your husbands and children. Don't let anything get in the way of that. To be self-controlled and pure. And similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. Young men, if this was a mark of the young men at Suncrest, that you are self-controlled. How do we say it during necessary masculinity? That you are not passive and you're not hostile, but you have a control over yourself that shows up in godly ways and provides for the world and family around you. And then Paul says this to Timothy, and all the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust them to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. And all he's doing is passing down the faith. He's like, Paul to Timothy, Timothy to the next generation to the next generation. This is the vision. And so, if I could summarize like this, there's a vision from Paul. So he said, above all, invest yourself in the next generation. That's what Paul is calling on us to do. At Suncrest, this isn't just a vision from Paul, but our leadership, our elders, have crystallized something that actually is a new element of our vision. I just want to read this to you. That we will have 30% of our church engaged in next generation environments. That's who we are as a church. That we're aiming to make sure that kids, Suncrest kids, birth through fifth grade, we're making sure Suncrest students, middle school and high school, that out of all of them, not just attending in this room, but engaged in environments that are at their age level, we will be the church that provides so that can happen. And we welcome everyone at that stage here. That's what we're building. And while that's a vision for us collectively, this is the vision for you, to embrace serving the next generation. Now, to some degree, this is an application for every person in this room, to think about how you, in your everyday life, how you in your conversations in the commons, how you with your kids and your grandkids can make sure you're oriented toward the next generation, that you are legacy builders. You're building an institution with your generosity and your generosity of time and your heart and your experience and your wisdom that you have. You are pouring that out to the next generation. And yes, very particularly, in order to really invest in those 30% of people who are involved in those programming elements, to say, and we, people in this room, will take responsibility for making sure those environments have the people they need and the environments that they need. I want to ask you today to potentially follow in the footsteps in a different way, a lesser way, honestly, than those 6 students who said, I'll consider being a pastor. I'll consider being a missionary. For you today, if you're not serving somewhere else at Suncrest, say, I'll consider serving the next generation. I mean, right now, right here in this room, we can't have too many people do this. We have well over 300 kids who are part of Suncrest Kids almost every weekend. We have well over 100 middle school and high school students who are here. Has been on Sundays and Mondays, and in August, it's shifting to Sundays and Sundays. Middle school environments, high school environments. And I'm asking you here, if you're not serving somewhere, if you would embrace serving the next generation. You can think about it as almost two categories. One is the category of engaging with people. This is probably the most natural way you think of it, to think you'll be in a classroom with kids on Thursday nights or Sunday mornings, or that you'll be here on Sunday afternoons and evenings with middle school and high school students, and you're actually engaging with them, and you're encouraging them, and you're patting them on the back, and you're leading discussions with them, and you're granting them your wisdom. It's very personal, and you can imagine in those relational environments, consistency is everything. We don't recruit people to those environments and be like, I can be here once a month. I'm like, that's no good. It's no good for the students to have someone show up once a month for them. They need someone who's consistent in their lives. The kids need to walk in and see the same face they saw last week. And if that's you, I think, you become an instant hero at our church. Others of you are like, Greg, it's probably actually not good for Suncrest kids or students for me to be the one interacting with them. But what could I do? And I'm like, we have all kinds of roles that create environments. They're working on supplies. They're making the rooms be awesome. They're doing things behind the scenes that aren't so personal with Suncrest kids and Suncrest students, but it really, really shapes the environments they walk into and prepares for the impact that they can have. And so I'm just curious on a weekend like this where we see right in front of us the next generation's impact. If there are people in this room who would step into that. Two simple ways to do that, and then I'll pray and we'll go. There is a QR code on the seat backs. If you're digitally inclined, just scan that QR code, fill out the form that's there, and we will get engaged with you. I mean, these are the environments where for Suncrest kids, it's on Thursday nights and 3 services on Sunday. And for Suncrest students, it's going to be middle school, late afternoon, and high school in the evening on Sunday, starting in August. If you fill out that form, you're not committing to doing anything yet, but you're saying, I'm open to a conversation about it. Let's carry that forward. If you're not a digital person, if you're a relational person, like the Next Gen team will be in the Commons area after tonight's service and would love just to start those conversations. Maybe you have a few questions and you want to get those answered, see if it could work for you. It would be great just to walk out there and engage with them. But mostly today, Suncrest, I want to applaud you. It's easy for a guy like me to stand up here every week and be like, we got to do better. You got to do better. And to some degree, that's always true. We always have room to grow. But for every one of you who's helped us to invest in the next generation over and over and over again, I'm grateful for it. As a pastor, as a parent, and as someone who knows that Paul called us to a vision to embrace the next generation. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.